Somewhere in the popular imagination, a psychopath's brain is simply broken, wired wrong, permanently, from birth. Fascinating to read about, terrifying to think about fixing. Here's what the actual research says. It's more complicated and somewhat more hopeful than that. Psychopathy isn't one broken switch. Brain imaging studies consistently point to disrupted connectivity across what's called the paralimbic network, a set of connected regions including the amygdala, orbitofrontal cortex, anterior cingulate, and insula. These areas normally work together to process emotional significance, weigh consequences, and generate guilt or empathy. In psychopathy, the network doesn't fire the way it does in most people. Threat and emotional cues that would normally trigger a strong response barely register. This is a real, replicated pattern across neuroimaging studies, not a single scan, not a single lab. And for a long time, the conclusion drawn from it was bleak. If the wiring is different from childhood, if it's substantially heritable, then psychopathy is essentially fixed. Traditional treatment approaches in prisons and forensic institutions have historically been almost useless. Some studies even found standard talk therapy made psychopathic offenders better at manipulation, not better at empathy. But the network works differently is not the same claim as the network cannot change. And here's where the more interesting, more contested part of the research begins. Start with neurofeedback. In studies training psychopathic offenders to self-regulate what's called slow cortical potentials, a measure of brain excitability over frontocentral regions, participants who learned to control that signal showed measurable reductions in impulsivity, aggression, and behavioral approach tendencies, alongside improvements in behavioral inhibition. This isn't imagination or willpower. It's operant control over a measurable brain signal, and it produced measurable behavioral change. Then there's non-invasive brain stimulation. Techniques like transcranial magnetic or direct current stimulation, aimed at the prefrontal regions implicated in the paralimbic network. A systematic review and meta-analysis, pooling these studies, found modest but real effects on psychopathic traits. Not a cure, not dramatic, but a real, measurable shift from an external intervention on a supposedly fixed trait. The strongest evidence, though, doesn't come from adults at all. It comes from early intervention. Programs that target children and adolescents showing the earliest signs of callous-unemotional traits before the pattern fully consolidates show meaningfully better outcomes than anything tried on adult offenders. One well-documented juvenile treatment model, built specifically around decompression and intensive early therapeutic contact rather than punishment, produced substantially lower reoffending rates than standard juvenile incarceration. The brain's plasticity, it turns out, is not evenly distributed across a lifetime. The earlier you intervene, the more the network still has room to reorganize. So can you rewire a psychopath's brain? Based on where the evidence actually stands. Partially, narrowly, and with real limits. Neurofeedback and brain stimulation show genuine, replicated effects, but they're modest, not transformative. Early intervention in children shows the most promise, precisely because it isn't trying to undo an already consolidated pattern. And treating adults with full-blown psychopathy remains, by the research community's own admission, one of the most treatment-resistant challenges in all of psychiatry. That's the honest caveat this video needs to sit with. This isn't one dramatic new study promising a breakthrough. It's a body of research, built slowly across neurofeedback trials, stimulation meta-analyses, and decades of juvenile intervention data that complicates the permanently broken story without replacing it with a fully fixable one. The real finding is messier and more interesting than either extreme. The network is different. It has some flexibility. That flexibility shrinks with age, and nobody has found anything close to a cure. If there's a version of hope in this research, it's not, you can rewire a psychopath's brain. It's the earlier you catch the pattern forming, the more the brain still has room to go a different way. And that's a very different, much narrower claim than the thumbnail question implies. We'll be watching where the early intervention research goes next, because if it holds up, it may matter more for how we treat at-risk kids than anything aimed at adults ever will.